Welcome back. Now, fewer pupils have returned to school this year. This compared to pre-pandemic attendance figures. The dropout rate has also tripled. And this is according to new data published by researchers involved in the NIDS-CRAM survey. The Zero Dropout campaign says there is an urgent need to track and trace absent learners. Let's get more on this with the program's director, Merle Mansfield, joins me now to talk about this. Merle, thank you for your time and good morning to you. Quite concerning, yes, back to school, lots of catching up to do, but equally is the fact that we need to note the amount of pupils that are absent from school at this time. Some we understand due to some of the taxi warfares and violence going on in parts of the Western Cape. Some have to walk long distances, but surely there are other reasons. Where are these pupils?
Good morning, Tumelo, and good morning to your viewers. Indeed, we are seeing a larger number of learners that haven't returned back to school this year. In fact, the NIDS-CRAM study indicated that we had 500,000 additional learners who haven't come back to school and are therefore considered to have dropped out. And some of that reasons really are that, some of the things that learners are navigating or factors that learners are navigating to hold their grip on school had been exacerbated by the impact of the pandemic, which often relates to socioeconomic circumstances of households. And we can see from that data that in the households where there was food insecurity, for example, or where households had run out of money, as per the questions in the survey, the likelihood that there was one or more learners that didn't return to school was a lot higher than for others. And so we can see that the impacts of the pandemic extending beyond just kind of health concerns, but also really in our education crisis.
Merle, you also raised quite an important point here to factor. The longer it takes, to get these learners or pupils back to school, the less likely that they will at the end. This is worrisome.
Extremely worrisome, and the reason why we've really been raising the alarm and trying to really spur people into action is that we need to be doing tracking and tracing at this time to understand why learners aren't coming back. So really understanding when a learner in my class is absent, what is the actual reason for that, and is there a process or a plan or an intervention I can put in place to assist a family or a learner to return to school. And then secondly, to really motivate families and learners to have these conversations about going to school or back to school in a very intentional way. We know that there has been concern for the spread of the virus, but as the report has uncovered similarly, that concern doesn't really extend to a significant likelihood for keeping learners at home. So to us, that means that there is additional factors or there's additional reasons that we need to understand as to why learners haven't come back. And now we have to do that now, because as you said, the longer it takes to get a learner back, the higher their disengagement level with school, and it's a lot harder to reintegrate a disengaged learner into the school space.
Yeah, if I were to then ask you, how do we track and trace? Because at this point, it's a almost disciplinary stakeholder intervention that's needed here, from the schools to the churches to the communities, the government. Everyone needs to, sort of come together and hold their hands in ensuring these absent pupils get back to school. If I were to ask you, how do we track and trace, what does that intervention then look like?
Absolutely. So we've seen schools doing really innovative stuff where they're using learners who have returned back, to identify learners who aren't back in the classroom, where they're creating buddy systems and groups to motivate learners who are back to keep that continuing and going. Secondly, using community volunteers, community structures, so community leaders, like street committees and forums that's already existing. We can see how that kind of intervention with a really grassroots community-based communications campaign worked really well with getting the COVID vaccine rollout in Limpopo, for example. And so very similarly, making sure the communities are engaged in actively looking for learners who we aren't able to access over the phone or who've moved away, because more likely than not, a community member or neighbor will know what's happened to that family, where that family's gone, or how to contact that family. Right. Church structures and religious leaders to motivate families and parents to really send kids back to school or to approach schools in circumstances where they're having difficulty doing that.
While we're talking, there were visuals just showing there of one particular pupil writing on the chalkboard. I'm sure one of the smart ones in the class that actually helping their peers, get, certain concept. And I just wonder, if we don't get these pupils back, just as a sign of warning before I let you go, what is likely to happen to these pupils long term? Because they are amazing, pupils, talented, intelligent, that need grooming and support. If we don't get them back into the schooling system, what's likely to happen to them, unfortunately?
So unfortunately, schooling in South Africa is still one of the only pathways into improving livelihoods. And I think that, for many of our learners who aren't able to access or complete schooling, their lives, their access to post-school opportunities, to employment opportunities, is very limited. And therefore, their real income potential, or the potential for them to meaningfully, engage in their lives, is also limited. And so what we're trying to say is that really making sure that we're getting learners back is to ensure that they are able to sustain education, that they're able to sustain participating in schooling or participating in navigating themselves and their lives meaningfully. Otherwise, we are unfortunately increasing the inequality gap within society and also really going to be seeing an increase in kind of the difficulty that poverty factors induce.
And I suppose also, again, a call to action here for the caregivers, because it's always easy to talk about schools and the teachers to play a role as well as government, but we have the primary caregivers. I mean, at times, I have to admit, Merle, I do see during school hours, some really underage school-going kids being on the road, either selling, either helping an adult, moving something. So you could see that there's a caregiver who is aware that a minor is not in school. What would your call to action for parents and primary caregivers be as well?
So I think that, it's very rare that you come across a parent or caregiver that doesn't want the best for their child. They all want the best. They want the kids to have the best education. And I think that in a time like this, when we're navigating a pandemic, there's often crises and issues in households that we are prioritizing over education. For example, just, securing food on our tables. And so what we'd like to say to parents and to households is to create space within the home for conversations about schooling, for addressing the anxieties or fears that your learners might have, and for also understanding where they are coming from, and to really reach out to organizations within your community, to the school within your space, to find out what support you can access if it is that you are having difficulty with getting the learners back to school. We have seen from research globally that learners who have at least one caring adult in their lives, who are championing their needs, do a lot better at life than learners who don't. And so really just having a supportive individual who is championing their needs and who's making space for them within the daily routine of the household really increases the chances of learners to succeed in life, but also to find schooling a lot more valuable and to be able to be engaging with schooling in a more meaningful way.
Oh, very well said. Thank you for joining me and talking to me about this. Zero Dropout Campaign Program Director, Merle Mansfield.